Today I'm going to talk about faith that applies to our past. Oftentimes, we think of past faith as an event. Time we accepted Jesus, okay, the moment we said the sinner's prayer, or the day that we were baptized, something we did, okay. But when we talk about faith in the past, it's really centered upon the whole concept of forgiveness. And I'm not just talking about a sort of an admitting that all mankind is fallen. We're talking about how it affects you. I'm going to read you a verse that is very, very familiar. It's found in Matthew. It's in the Lord's Prayer. It goes like this. Chapter 6 of Matthew, verse 12. And forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. You may read this and say, why is Jesus talking about this? I mean, didn't we say the sinner's prayer when, on the day we came to Jesus? So why are we doing this? You see, why he's saying this? Because it's important for the believer to understand and to assess life in terms of our frailties, in terms of our weakness, in terms of our past as specific actions. Because if we just admit our failings as a general falling of mankind, really, in actuality, you think you're perfect because there's nothing that God can pin on you, and there's nothing that other people can pin on you. So how are you ever going to grow? How is Christ ever going to transform you? Because you only believe in what we call the sinfulness of man in some theological generic way. But what I'm talking about is how does our failings manifest itself in you and me? Without that sort of deeper assessment spiritually, we're never going to grow. It's always going to be deeds and actions, and we're going to fool ourselves because we're never going to admit. Have you ever been in a relationship where you knew the individual was at fault and that they had shortcomings, but they never admitted? It's always your fault because they're always justified. That's a very tiresome relationship. That's like a curse to be in a relationship like that. How do you think God feels when we worship him, but we never admit anything about ourselves, okay? So that's the first thing. For faith to really affect us, we have to adequately understand faith in the past, forgiveness of the things that we have done. And sort of it's never ending. It's never ending assessment. But there's a second passage I want to share. It's found also in the Gospel of Matthew. It's also a very famous passage. It's in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 27. You've probably heard this passage as well. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Now, this is very interesting. I think the Lord's Prayer focuses on the individual's understanding and realization of our need for God and the admittance of who we are in actual time, okay, in actual events. But this passage in Matthew 27 talks about forgiveness theologically from the divine perspective to us. That the whole ministry and the whole purpose of Jesus Christ, his death on the cross, which was very much one of the high moments in what he was going to do for us, is for forgiveness of sins. It is not just for us to ask for forgiveness so that God can always put the guilt upon us. But when we ask forgiveness, it also reminds us of the limitless grace of God and the purpose of why he came to earth, to forgive us. Some people never admit our frailties. Some people bear too much guilt and never understand the grace of Jesus Christ. And that is equally as harmful to our spiritual growth. Amongst the people who followed God, you had people who like planned murders for others. You had adulterers. You had immoral people. You had the Apostle Paul. He calls himself the chief of sinners. And you know what he did? He planned persecution of innocent Christians, their death. He called himself, like I said, in the book of Philippians, chief of sinners. But when you read his writings, he knows what he did. But he also was a champion of the grace of God, and he understood that the grace of God could cover his past. So you don't get him wallowing in guilt. He understands what he's done, but he understands the transformative grace of God even more. And so many of us need this because we have a past, we have a guilt, and sometimes we think that no one could understand and no one would ever forgive us. Well, sometimes we do something and we cannot change the past. But I'll tell you, in Jesus Christ, we can all be forgiven.